Welcome back to part 3 of our video series on the Battle of Kursk, one of the most decisive battles of World War II. In this part, we will delve into the massive air raids carried out by the Red Army, which targeted Nazi troop concentrations and military depots along the entire Kursk line. These swift and effective strikes, which caused severe losses in manpower and equipment for the Germans, slowed their advance and greatly affected their attack plans. At the same time, the video will analyze and detail the extent of damage that the Red Army caused to the enemy through consecutive air strikes, thereby creating an important tactical advantage for the Soviet defense forces. The highlight of this part is the moment when the Nazis' full-scale attack officially began, opening a fierce and decisive confrontation on the Kursk front. Let's follow the tense developments of the battle, the tactics used, and their impact on the final result of this legendary battle. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next parts. Pre-battle developments. Although the Soviet Supreme Command disagreed with K.K. Rokossovsky's proposals to launch a preemptive strike, it encouraged the fronts to launch counter-preparatory strikes with air power and artillery to destroy the German military's vehicles and weapons and weaken the German shock troops concentrated in the two areas south of Oryol and north of Kharkov. Air Force operations. On the 17th of April, the Soviet long-range aviation launched a deep raid on the Orsha airfield, destroying 5 Ru-88 bombers of the 1st and 4th Squadrons of the 121st Bomber Division Germany and 3 Dornier Tu-17s of the Transport Squadron. On the 20th of April, the same airfield was raided again, burning 10 light attack aircraft. The German Luftwaffe also carried out bombing raids on the Soviet rear. The Gorky automobile plant No. 1 Gurkovsky Avtomobili Zavod Gaz was subjected to a series of heavy attacks throughout June 1943. On the nights of June 4th and 5th, He-111 aircraft of the 1st, 3rd, 4th, 55th and 100th Squadrons of the 1st Air Army Germany dropped 179 tons of bombs on the factory, causing great destruction to the buildings and production lines. All 50 buildings, 9 kilometers of conveyor belts, 8,000 pieces of equipment, engines, and 5,900 vehicles of various types being assembled were destroyed. However, the Germans were wrong in choosing this target because Gaz Plant No. 1 produced only T-70 light tanks in increasingly limited quantities, and most of the lines had been switched to producing Gaz cars. Meanwhile, Plant No. 112, the second largest producer of the formidable T-30 for tank, continued production unabated. 2,851 tanks were produced there in 1943, 3,619 in 1944. And 3,255 in 1945, the Luftwaffe also bombed the Gorky Gun Factory No. 92 and the Lavokin Aircraft Plant, which produced the La-5 and La-5FN fighters but could not reach the largest Soviet tank factories in Chelyabinsk. In just 6 weeks, the destroyed production facilities were repaired or rebuilt by Soviet engineers and workers, and production resumed. The Soviet Air Force mobilized the air groups of the Kalinin, Western, Bryansk, Central, Voronezh, Southwestern, Southern fronts, and the Long-Range Air Force to organize a series of large-scale air strikes for a week from May 6th to 13th on all airfields of the 4th and 6th German Air Forces. The first surprise attack in the late afternoon and lasting until the night of May 6th took the German Air Force completely by surprise and suffered heavy losses. In the following days, the surprise was lost and the losses of the German Air Force decreased. However, in just the first 3 days of the air raids, more than 400 German aircraft of all types were burned on the airfields, 16 were shot down in air combat. The Soviet side lost 18 aircraft. From May 8th to 10th, the 1st Western Front, 2nd Voronezh Front, 5th Steppe Front Air Forces and long-range aviation continued to launch a second wave of attacks on railways, roads, traffic junctions, and places where German troops were unloading and assembling artillery and tanks. Aerial reconnaissance counted 85 tanks and more than 120 guns of the Nazi army destroyed. From May 11th to 13th, the Soviet Air Force launched night raids with the main use of long-range aviation and night bombers aimed at airfields deep behind the German lines. Another 200 German aircraft were burned on the airfields. The Soviet side lost more than 20 aircraft, all shot down by German anti-aircraft fire. Counterattacks against the German army. On the 1st of July, orders were issued from the German Army High Command setting the date for the attack on the 5th of July the next morning. Marshal A.M. Vasilevsky warned the commanders of the fronts N.F. Vachetin, K.K. Rokossovsky, and I.S. Konev to put their troops on full combat alert for the German attack, which was to begin between the 3rd and the 6th of July. On the 2nd of July, the Soviet army received detailed information about the plan of the attack from what the Germans called the Red Orchestra, and the conductor of that orchestra was still Rudolf Rosseler. The 3 people suspected of having taken the information and passed it on to him were Werther, the alias of a person working in Hermann Göring's Air Force General Staff, a person working in the Nazi government agency, and the last person was Hitler's photographer. Although the data was quite reliable, the Soviet Supreme Command still ordered the fronts to continue checking. On June 2nd, Soviet Fighter Air Force Lieutenant A.I. Kozevnikov of the 2nd Air Army shot down a German reconnaissance plane. The German pilot said that his troops would go on the offensive in 3 days and his task was to find camouflaged Soviet artillery and tank positions. On July 4th, the first-line units of the 4th Tank Army Germany began to organize combat reconnaissance. In the afternoon of the same day, Marshal G.K. Zhukov had just flown to the command post of General K.K. Rokossovsky in Vorobyevka to direct the northern wing of the Kursk front, when he received a phone call from General N.P. Pukov, commander of the 13th Army, reporting that he had captured a tongue of the 6th Infantry Division of the 47th Tank Corps, 2nd Tank Army Germany. That tongue reported that the Germans would switch to attack at 3 a.m. on July 5th. That same afternoon, the 7th Guards Army also reported to Marshal A.M. Vasilevsky, who was at the headquarters of General N.F. Vachetin in Vobrushevo to direct the southern wing, that the 25th Guards Division had captured a German prisoner of war from the 168th Rifle Division of the 3rd Tank Corps' Kempf Group of Operations. This person stated that the German soldiers had been given 5 rations of dry food and a can of brandy and that they were to attack on July 5th. Having accurately determined the G-hour of the German army, Marshal G.K. Zhukov and Marshal A.M. Vasilevsky decided to order the 3 Voronezh, Central and Bryansk fronts to conduct preparatory counterattacks from the ground and air against the 2 German shock troops. On the afternoon of July 4th, German Ru-87s dropped a long trail of bombs on the Soviet front line at positions opposite the Kempf Group of Operations to cover the Großdeutschland Mechanized Division of the 3rd Tank Corps conducting combat reconnaissance in the Butovo-Davidovka area. Encountering strong defensive positions of the 78th Guards Rifle Division of the 7th Guards Army, the German mechanized vehicles had to stop and wait for the Flamethrower tanks that were stuck in the mud due to the rain during the night. Time was running out and it was impossible to wait for the Supreme Commander's orders. At 2:30 a.m. on July 5th, Marshal Zhukov ordered the use of artillery fire to prepare for a counterattack on the Germans. At 2:30 a.m., the Bryansk, Central, and Voronezh fronts began their preparations with all the firepower they had. More than 2,000 Katyusha BM-13 batteries and nearly 10,000 artillery barrels combined, with long-range bombers and night bombers to rain a firestorm on all the attack preparation lines of the two German assault forces. In total, about 20,000 artillery shells, more than 4,500 Katyusha shells, 200 attack sorties, and 450 night bombing sorties were flown. Luftwaffe airfields, German tank bases, and German logistics bases at Bryansk, Oryol, Dmitrovsk-Orlovsky, Trubchevsk Airfield, Kudrymikhailovsk, Konotop Airfield, Turkino Airfield, Romny, Akhtirka, Trotyonets, Poltava main airfield of the 4th Air Army, Novobodolaga, Marifa, and Kharkov were heavily bombarded. Within 20 kilometers of the front line, long streaks of fire could be seen in the darkness, accompanied by numerous large explosions. Ammunition depots exploded, shooting flammable materials into the sky like fireworks. At the headquarters of the Army Groups Center and South, German generals and senior officers immediately held a meeting to try to judge whether this was preparation for a Soviet preemptive attack. Meanwhile, on the front line, Soviet artillery and airstrikes continued for 2 hours. The German artillery was completely taken by surprise and responded weakly. Since the German night bombers were still in the experimental stage, the Germans were completely without the weapon that their opponents had and that proved so effective in this case. At the Soviet forward observation posts both north and south of the Kursk arc, scouts saw fires and large explosions. At 4:30 a.m. on July 5th, the Soviet counter-preparatory artillery and air bombardment ended. No one could know what was happening inside the German lines, but the counter-preparation clearly worked. According to the testimony of German prisoners of war, the attack was to begin at exactly 3 a.m. on July 5th, but it was not until 4:40 a.m., after the Soviet artillery had stopped, that German reconnaissance planes appeared in the sky, began to point out the attack aircraft and artillery to clear the way for the attack, but the firepower did not reach a high density. It was not until 6 a.m. that the German tank armies began to attack. The German offensive overview on the southern flank, Army Group South Germany under the command of Field Marshal Erich von Manstein mobilized the 4th Panzer Army and the Kempf Group of Operations, concentrating 19 divisions, including 7 tank divisions and mechanized divisions, to attack on a front of more than 80 kilometers from Dmitrievka through Belgorod to Shebekino north of Vovchansk. All 7 tank divisions and mechanized divisions of Germany focused on attacks on the front line from south of Belgorod to northwest of Timurovka. On the northern flank, Army Group Center under Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge mobilized the 2nd Panzer Army and the 9th Army with 6 tank divisions and 8 infantry divisions to attack on a narrow front of only 40 kilometers from Tureka, south of Voronezh to Trosna, northwest of Malor-Kangansk. Army Group Center's 2nd Army with 3 infantry corps was assigned to contain the front from Sevsk through Rinsk to Sumy. After a week of attacks, by July 12th, the southern wing of Army Group South Germany advanced 36 kilometers in the direction of Belinikino-Godashevo. The northern wing of Army Group Center advanced no more than 12 kilometers in the direction of Ponyry, Olkovatka, facing fierce resistance from the Central Front commanded by General K.K. Rokossovsky and the Voronezh Front commanded by General N.F. Vachetin. Both German tank armies were stopped for the next week, losing a lot of manpower and equipment on the strong defense line of the Soviet Army. On July 20th, having failed to make any major advances, the German army was forced to retreat and the Soviet army went on the counterattack. Oryol-Kursk direction, the 2nd Panzer Army Germany was divided into 2 parts. The northwestern wing, consisting of the 55th and 53rd Infantry Corps, held a defensive line from south of Kirov through Lyudinovo, Bolkov to Mitsensk, covering the rear of the shock troops concentrated south of Oryol. The main force of the Army Group consisted of the 41st, 46th, and 43rd Tank Corps, coordinating with the 56th Tank Corps and the 23rd Infantry Corps of the 9th Army Group, forming a northern shock force consisting of 8 tank divisions 2, 4, 5, 9, 12, 18, 20, 25. 1 Mechanized Division 10 and 11 Infantry Divisions 6, 7, 14, 76, 78, 86, 131, 216, 258, 292, and 383. The main direction of the German shock forces' attack was aimed at the junction between the right flank of the 13th Army Soviet Union and the left flank of the 48th Army in the Pokrovskoye, Malorkhangansk area, and the junction between the left flank of the 13th Army and the 70th Army in the Soborovka, Olkovatka area. The intention of Army Group Center Germany to encircle and destroy the 13th Army Soviet Union at Ponyry as it had encircled and destroyed the 13th Army Old. At the Bialystok salient, western Belorussia 2 years earlier was clearly shown from the very first attack. But the Soviet Army of 1943 was very different from the Soviet Army of 1941-4. German tank corps concentrated on a narrow front of only 45 kilometers encountered very strong counterattacks from the Rifle Corps and the 15th, 81st, 132nd, 148th, and 280th Infantry Divisions. Behind them, on the second line of defense, there was a force twice as strong. On the morning of July 5th, the German tanks did not advance as quickly as they had hoped. The dense minefields forced the German tanks to stop and wait for engineers to clear the mines, and these units themselves became targets for Soviet infantry fire. As the German artillery units, heavily damaged in the counter-battery, were no longer powerful enough to suppress the enemy's firing points, the German tanks and self-propelled guns had to attack in very narrow strips, flanked by kilometers of minefields, which caused heavy losses to the German armored forces. The 53rd Anti-Tank Self-Propelled Gun Regiment of the 41st Tank Corps had 49 Elephant, also known as Ferdinand self-propelled guns, of which 37 were destroyed or severely damaged by mines and heavy fire from Soviet anti-tank guns. In just 3 kilometers on the first day of the attack, the 53rd Regiment Germany paid the price of 1,287 lives and 5,921 wounded, and the regiment was almost eliminated from the battle. In the defensive area of the 81st and 307th Infantry Divisions north of Ponyry, the anti-tank gun company of Captain G.I.E. Gisev fought to the last bullet, to the last man, and destroyed 19 German tanks and armored vehicles. Contributing to the heavy damage to the German tanks were also very effective attacks from the air by Il-2 armored attack aircraft. Covered by fighters above, the Il-2 flying tanks aimed at the roofs of the German tanks, a very vulnerable position with thin armor, to unleash the deadly fire of 37mm guns equipped with sabot shells and short-range rockets. General Walter Model quickly discovered the fatal weakness of the German tanks and armored vehicles, especially the Ferdinand self-propelled guns. Although these weapons were completely effective at medium and long range, they were not equipped with auxiliary machine guns to deal with infantry when the enemy was close and were vulnerable to the fire of Soviet anti-tank guns protected in a network of trenches if not covered by the machine guns of light armored vehicles and accompanying infantry. Adding to this weakness was the mistake of General Helmuth Weidling, who was an infantry general, in allowing the self-propelled guns to overtake the tanks and advance. The Inspector General of German Tank Forces, General Heinz Guderian, commented, "When the armored units broke through the enemy infantry defenses, they had to move like quails, literally, and use their artillery to suppress every nest of fire. But they could not neutralize the enemy's machine guns and rifles, let alone destroy them. So our infantry supporting the tanks could not follow the armored units closely. The armored units were completely separated from the other branches of the army when they approached the Soviet artillery area. The only positive result achieved by the German army on the northern flank on the 5th of July was the bloody successful attack of the 9th and 20th Panzer Divisions and the 6th and 78th Infantry Divisions of General Joachim Lemelson's 47th Panzer Corps and the Infantry Corps when it pushed back the Soviet 29th Infantry Corps. Captured the villages of Podolyan and Soborovka, 8 kilometers from the attack line, and threatened Olkovatka. On the left flank, the 46th Panzer Corps Germany was still struggling over the villages of Tereka and Nilitz with the 280th, 132nd, and 15th Infantry Divisions Soviet Union less than 3 kilometers from the attack line and by the end of the day was almost at a standstill. On the morning of July 7th, General K.K. Rokossovsky used the 19th Tank Corps' 2nd Tank Army and the 2nd Tank Brigade 13th Army to organize a counterattack on the left flank of the 47th Tank Corps Germany with the intention of restoring the continuous defense line of the 13th Army in the direction of Olkovatka. The right wing of the 48th Army also participated in this counterattack. In this counterattack, the 19th Tank Corps Soviet Union applied a new tactic. Taking advantage of the terrain of the narrow gaps between the upper reaches of the Oka and Svapa rivers, the Soviet infantry suddenly attacked, breaking through the German tank barrier, directly attacking the accompanying German infantry divisions, pushing the German infantry away from the tanks, and the remaining problem was solved between 2 German tank divisions and 3 Soviet tank brigades. Although the counterattack was unsuccessful, the 19th Tank Corps lost an entire tank brigade. But the counterattack slowed down the attack speed of the 47th Tank Corps Germany. More than 30 German tanks were destroyed before the Olkovatka Gate. The Germans only advanced to 10 kilometers from the starting line. Dear friends, the powerful and accurate air strikes of the Red Army in the opening phase not only caused serious damage to the Nazi forces, but also significantly slowed down the pace of their advance along the entire Kursk front. Through detailed analysis, we can clearly see the key role of the Soviet Air Force in creating the initial tactical advantage for the defensive position. Massive armored corps from both sides charged into each other amid a sea of fire and smoke. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any developments in this great war. Part 3 ends at the climactic moment when the German offensive begins on a massive scale. This is the starting point for the fiercest clashes of the Battle of Kursk, where will, tactics, and technological prowess will be tested to the ultimate limit. Massive armored corps from both sides charged into each other amid a sea of fire and smoke. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any developments in this great war.